recording. All the things. So I think we can go ahead and get started. Or do you want to tee up what we're doing today, since this one is?
I guess we're just here to kind of hear from experts in the geospatial field, and maybe those people who are thinking about what they want to do next year, and also just about things that they're not doing. And maybe want to. So if we want to have some short intros, start with, that would be good.
I'll start then. Being the shy person here. I'm Nate Roth. I am an alumni of the Geography graduate group. And I also did my undergraduate here too, and spent a fair number of years between the two working with the Information Center for the Environment. That was a little geospatial skunk works within the Department of Environmental Science and Policy. So, fair number of folks here by way of that or through graduate work. I am currently the Science and Data Advisor to the Director of the California Department of Conservation. And in that role, try to help make sure that our department, which has responsibilities for all of the, we include the California Geological Survey, a lot of the agricultural land conservation work across the state, Division of Mine Reclamation, so responsibilities related to ensuring that mined lands are returned to a usable status following the completion of mining, and everybody's favorite part of state government, regulating the oil, gas, and geothermal drilling for the state of California. I also do a fair number of sort of side projects, essentially detailed to the Natural Resources Agency, most significant among those being the state leading the data efforts for the state's 30 by 30, so conserving 30% of the state's land and waters by 2030, and another side project trying to guide the state towards complete coverage of LiDAR in partnership with USGS and other state and federal organizations. That's kind of where I am right now.
Well, I'm not quite as esteemed a career as Nate yet.
Hey, welcome. We're just in time. We're doing intros, but we can circle back.
And Karen was my boss for about 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, we can circle back to Karen. Let her catch her breath.
So much.
So I look at where people are displaced through after wildfires, if people are still in wildfire zones. And we also do a lot of contract work in flood risk, mostly for the state Department of Water Resources. But I also kind of have had a career in the nonprofit and education side. So I spent a lot of years up in Chico. I was a project manager for their Geographic Information Center. And mostly we did contracts for state government. We did a lot of work for the Public Utilities Commission, mapping out high-speed internet in rural California to support their grant programs. Really interesting. And then I've also had a career on the education side. So I've taught GIS and cartography up at Chico many times. And so I kind of have a foot in the education world with spatial sciences and a little bit in the state government world. Hopefully at least in 6 months or so.
I wouldn't mind. I was also no. So my name is Shannon Bjorn. I'm from Western, local private archaeology. So I've been working in GIS for cultural resources for, almost 20 years. And I run a team of, I think there's nearly 10 of us now in GIS, getting scientists out into the field and back home safely and processing their data and doing spatial analysis to predict the location of our geological systems. You already know. Okay. So just a basic introduction. Is that right? Okay. So my name is Karen Beardsley. I have coffee. I'll drink it after I talk. So I started here. I have my degrees in applied math and computer science at UC Davis. So I did my undergrad here, and then joined the Peace Corps, went off and taught math and science and all sorts of things in Kenya. And then decided, what do I do with a math degree? I don't know what I'm doing with my life, all these kinds of things. And then something just popped into my world, which was GIS. So I was offered a position to use GIS to estimate elephant populations for the continent of Africa. I thought, that sounds fun. But I had no idea what GIS was. Got a little bit of training, went back and worked on that project, and then I was really hooked. So that's how I sort of I fell into GIS. It was never a choice. It chose me, I like to say. But I've chosen to go forward with it since then. So then, after getting a master's at Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara in geography, I moved to Davis, and that's when I, for 20 years, was at the Information Center for the Environment and started as a programmer, and eventually was the managing director. So that's where I poached Nate from Bob Brewer. Who was the IT manager, and then I coached Naomi because she was in the we were in the marching band. Yeah, that's right. That was kind of a key thing that said, oh, you're in a marching band, you must be great. Yeah. In any case, that was a great. You probably already heard a little bit about ICE, but it was it's really not here anymore, but it was a great place for when there was a need for a university academic sort of department to help state and federal entities with work that was short-term projects, and so we did a lot of that for quite a long time.
Geospatial works.
Yeah, but so then I actually got my PhD here at UC Davis while I was still working at ICE, which was very nice. I think Nate did the same thing. Yeah. And then, but then I had an opportunity. I got a Fulbright in Bhutan, which was really exciting. And I went there for a year and set up their GIS system and taught and have sort of been teaching for CPE, continuing professional education. And now in the summers, I get to go back to Bhutan and teach GIS in the summers. It was in my class. And just love doing that. So but my full-time real job now is with global affairs here on campus. So it's an administrative job, it's an academic coordinator position, and I'm still using GIS. So I guess my point is that you can pull GIS into just about anything, and when we're talking about how is UC Davis engaged globally, GIS is a great tool for that. So it's not my job anymore. I'm in it. And I still get to teach, so that's the basic.
Sure, you want to introduce the plan?
I was going to ask how to get started in GIS. It seems like maybe I can join the marching band. Which I didn't know about, but that's what good work. But maybe we'll talk about how to get started. What kind of skills you learned when you started or before you started, and exactly how you got into GIS, reporting progress.
This is so natural.
Well, I guess in the story of, but maybe not exactly the same as Karen, but in many ways, geography at least was kind of something that I always did. I mean, I grew up doing a lot of hiking, backpacking, a lot of activity with scouts, which I do again now with my own kids. So maps were always a thing, but there was a key turning point for me on GIS, which was the summer between my senior year of high school and starting undergraduate here, running into a seasonal ranger up in the parking lot, the Summit parking lot at Mount Lassie, who I was like, I don't know where our conversation started, but it ended up being a little bit of a, oh, you're going to Davis? I go to some other school. I don't remember what. What are you thinking of studying? And I said, something environmental. He's like, you should try this thing called GIS. I just took my first class. And he described it as like, yep, that's what I'm doing.
This was more of a choice.
Yeah. I mean, it was that sounds like the type of thing that I ought to be doing. And so I did the classes here, ended up learning that Karen and several other folks that I had alumni connections to were in the GIS side of things. Spent a little bit of time as a student system administrator in the department, and it was a natural transition into working at ICE and then returning to grad school. And then there was a good opportunity for moving to the state that all sort of linked relatively seamlessly with each other. And then once the state, they kept making the offers for positions that I couldn't refuse.
I would say there's kind of three basic skills that lead you to GIS. I think if you like to solve problems and you're really persistent at it, I think that's really key. And so, I mean, for me, I would never give up. So if when I started learning GIS, it was super frustrating. It was all command line. It was arc plot and arc edit. And it was you guys don't know what that is, but it was the old days of GIS in the 1980s. 1989 is when I started. And the thing that I realized I was really good at this, probably with my math background and my logical mind led me to, was because I really liked, I was frustrated while I was trying to solve a problem, but then I would solve it because there's always 100 different ways to solve something in GIS. And that gave me really great satisfaction. So sort of that curiosity, that perseverance, you have to be flexible and adaptable because things are always changing. That's the other thing about GIS, it never stays the same. So I'd say, that's another sort of, if that's kind of how you are or what your brain is like, then that might be a really good way for you to go. So I'm kind of answering the question a different way, but I've just kind of found those are like the skills that they're not even necessarily skills that you learn, but just kind of who you are is really helpful. I mean, nowadays having a programming background is really good as well. I did, and I programmed, but I actually really hated that for some reason. And now I pride myself in saying I never write a line of code. That's quite true because arcade is a little scripted. But and I have a student in my class who's like, oh, I can do R. And I'm like, great. That is a wonderful combination. Naomi also, like, I write all these codes. Great. I think that's also another skill that's great to have.
Yeah, echoing a lot of what Karen said, I mean, I think when people come to GIS, they come to it from one or two places. Either you kind of have more of a computer science background and that's what attracts you. And then the learning part is thinking about, okay, we're dealing with spatial features that are really special. And when we intersect them, there's all sorts of things you have to think about. Or you come at it from the kind of more human geography, cartography side. And that's where I came from. So I came in really dreading taking the GIS class in my geography undergrad, but I was there because I loved maps and I loved thinking about space and how opportunity is linked with neighborhood and issues like that. And so I came in so excited to take cartography, and then it was like, oh, you have to take GIS as a prerequisite. Oh my God. So I went into it dreading it and spent a lot of time struggling in the beginning because the programming side was not my strong suit. And so I think whichever way you come at it, focusing on investing on the side of it that isn't your strong suit makes what you're already good at so much better. I ended up kind of in a position where I ended up loving the scripting side of things. Once I realized that the things I cared about, I could kind of make a difference and hopefully try to direct grant money where it really belonged to go. If I did a good enough job figuring out the technical side of how to process the information about where people had access to resources and where they didn't. So it took a long time and a lot of years, and I still have to ask the people that are better scripters than me, like Naomi, when I run what I do. But I think really, whichever side you come at it from, just also invest in that. That's what makes, part of what makes GIS so incredible is that it makes those two traditions in a way that other disciplines really don't.
GIS accidental. My degree from GIS is in environmental resource and I was working for intern slave raisers back in college. And somebody in management came to me and handed me a software disk and said, "We need somebody who can do this GIS stuff. We can't afford to pay anybody. So here's $20. Go buy yourself a book. You have 2 weeks." And that was my yeah. Back in RQ3, that was more doable than it is now, I think, you know. But it was perhaps. But I do think that what you're saying about a general sort of curiosity and interest in learning is sort of critical to moving forward in GIS. It's not only is it technical, but it changes all the time. Like how many of us thought that we were going to be web developers when we first started with GIS, but how many of us are doing that as a normal part of our course now as GIS analysts. But when I hire somebody into my department, you're either coming in with GIS knowledge, but you don't know anything about archaeology, and you can't map it if you don't understand, you know, or you're coming in with an archaeological background and maybe you built a dark map a couple of times, but you don't know anything about projections or spatial data. So one way or the other, there's a learning curve, and I've always found it kind of fascinating to sit down next to people at a conference who do GIS and find out that they're doing GIS for real estate, but some of their predictive models for finding the best place to build or whatever is actually pretty similar to what we're using for like where to predict where a village might have been 2,000 years ago, you know. So the tools and skills that you learn that overlap in different industries, super fascinating, but you have to be able to adapt to their industry for it.
One thing, a couple things that I'll add since I panelists. One of the first questions we came up, I think there's at least 3 categories of folks that come in. There are the people that come in with a subject matter expertise other than GIS. There are the geographers at heart that come in not too picky about which subject area they're working at, and increasingly important, particularly for GIS at enterprise scale, are the IT folks that come in and either need to learn GIS or just IT folks that have that kind of spatial sense about want to think of things in that way, and they are becoming an absolutely key underpinning of enterprise level GIS.
Great. Also questions or should I go on?
Just to your point of something that I've seen frequently about things crossing domains. So this is going to get into kind of like the work professional sort of question. What suggestions do you have for people who are maybe in the real estate domain and want and have that skill set and they know it's transferable, but maybe don't know anything about archaeology? What ways can candidates make themselves appealing to you if they're going across domains but have that central skill, or if they're coming from IT, or if they're coming from some other thing and they're trying to break into a, different domain, subject domain than what they've worked on before, but definitely have the relevant skills. And I'll give another example besides this. There was just a job posting on the spatial list for the Air Resources Board. To get that job, you need it's an air resource scientist level 1, so you need to take that exam. But they really are looking, the description, they're looking for a GIS person. So so this happens frequently where you have an interest in a domain, you're not super picky about what it's going to be. So do you have any suggestions for people to like make yourself an attractive candidate if you're trying to cross the domain like that?
So, I think it depends a little bit on whether or not you're applying for more in an entry level position or whether or not you're applying for a higher level position. As somebody who's looking for a job right now, the ball is still in your court. It is so hard to hire people. You guys were joking about poaching, but that's not a joke. Like, we've been trying to hire a senior GIS analyst at my office for a year and, getting very little qualified candidates. So my first advice would be don't feel like you can't apply just because you don't have experience in that field. But if you're applying for a higher level position, I'd sell any experience you have leading a team, any experience you have leading a project, any experience you have kind of running a show to a certain degree. And almost doesn't matter where you're doing it. If you have those kinds of skills, that's almost not teachable and super hard to find. And, whether or not you have experience in archaeology itself, is less important than an interest and the ability to adapt.
A demonstrated interest in learning and growing. Particularly one you can document by way of your past work that may be in a different field, but says, I started out at this level. By the end of the project, I had picked up these certain skills and demonstrated that I have these such competencies. Yeah, and that shows a lot for someone that's trying to step across.
Yeah, I mean, I'll actually give an example that happened a few days ago is, right now there's a GIS for climate science MOOC going on. And I don't know if anyone else has
Yep.
just gotten on, I'm doing it, right?
Yeah.
I'm doing the MOOC because wow, this is fun. Well, my niece, has just moved to a new city in Seattle. She only has an associate's degree. She doesn't know what to do. She's having a hard time. I said, hey, take this MOOC. And her mom said, hey, you know, she's really good at problem solving. I said, oh, what a great idea. So I'm meeting with her now every week to talk about the MOOC. So just something as simple as being willing to take a MOOC. And then when I talk to her, she's like, oh, you know, I was really annoyed that in the delivery truck section, it was having you manually enter something. So I decided to write a Python script to do that. And I'm like, and I was like, can I hire you?
Yeah.
You know, because I mean, this is someone who is just starting GIS for the very first time, and she's already like writing Python script to do stuff because she's annoyed at how the exercise was written. So again, it doesn't, do you have to have a PhD to do GIS? No. Do you even have to have a bachelor's degree? Well, you do to get a job. That's the problem, right? Or you're going to be more considered for a job if you have a master's over a bachelor's. I get that. But it's that thing that I just saw in my niece that makes me think, wow, this person is like, and Kayla, I have to point to Kayla, we're doing a class and she says, oh, I could write some R code to do that. Does anyone else want help with that? That wasn't part of the class. You know, I'm still trying to hire Kayla, so if anyone wants to hire anyone. Anyway, but again, you know, that's the thing that I really notice. And I think anybody can, it's part of just who people are sometimes.
Yeah. I look for conference attendance and geo community involvement as well. People who are spending their off hours, you know, going to the Eurissa meetup or, you know, going to CalGIS or whatever it is that they're doing. That shows that this isn't necessarily just an 8 to 5 thing for you. This is a passion.
Yeah.
And people who have a passion for something are going to excel at it.
I think there's something too in just having humility toward the subject matter and going into a new field, realizing that the tools and the workflows you've used for a totally different spatial phenomena might not even apply in this scenario. But as long as you kind of know how geoprocessing tools work and you know how to maintain integrity of that data and respect whatever data you're working with, whether it's air quality or whatever, and just know that you're going to have to be adaptable, I think that makes a good candidate too.
That's one advice, so thank you. And that's good for, like, I just had a mid-career shift and all of those things came into play. And I would say, like, anyone who's an undergrad, like, don't be constrained by whatever your piece of paper says on it. I have a geology degree and I have pretty much never worked in that. So, you know, just like all of that advice was, thank you, that was really well said.
Let me add one thing, which is if you're going to a job interview at your organization and it's archaeology, you know, even if you have no archaeology, dig into that organization before you have the interview. So I think that goes without saying, but you can learn a lot about an industry and an organization before an interview. And for me, if someone knows, you know, if I'm in global affairs and somebody researches our strategic plan and talks to me about that, that's a plus because they took the time to try to understand the organization. So,
I guess sort of in the same area of questions, like in a field that changes so much like ours, how do you stay up to date with like changing technologies, and do you have to, and how important is that?
It's a mix. I think there's an extent to which just kind of knowing how to like respect the data means that doesn't matter what version of ARC you're using, or if you're using QGIS, you kind of know when you're doing something wrong. So there's definitely that. At the same time, I think it is important, and I'm going through this right now because I'm so behind the curve with like actually becoming competent in ARC Pro. I'm like already 10 years behind. So there's an extent to which, yeah, staying up to date with software updates is super, super important. However, with the right attitude, you're going to be able to learn those things if you dedicate the time. It's just a matter of buttons are in different places and windows look different. But if you know what the data should look like, and you're respecting the data integrity, you're going to be okay. You're going to figure it out.
I mean, I think I'd add that there are so many tools for self-learning. So if I said, hey, I think I want to use Experience Builder because I saw a couple of things that looked really cool in that, I can go to learn.arcgis.com and I can take 5 courses that are 45 minutes each, and I can learn enough to propel me, you know, when you're at a certain point where you know how these tools work, but you just need that kickstart. I think there's a whole lot of ability to do that. So I think all of us, and the other way you keep up to date is you teach.
Yeah,
You
courses
teach,
too.
right? That's how I keep up to date in GIS, is I teach. Oh, it's okay. Well, if I'm going to teach this class, I better know what I'm talking about. Okay. And I need to be able to be teaching and say, I'm not sure about that, but I know how to find the answer.
Yeah.
Right. And be humble about that,
Yeah.
about what you do and what you don't know. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there are different levels, and a lot of it's going to depend on where you want to position yourself, the position that you're in. The reality is that a lot of the basics of GIS, it really doesn't matter what software you're using. It's all functionally the same. And changes from ArcMap to Arc Pro, yeah, the buttons changed. The names of tools may have drifted a little bit. They've got new variants of some of the old tools that may take better advantage of the capabilities in the systems. But the fundamentals really haven't changed, and people are grinding along in the same dreary rut for mechanical GIS that they've been in for 10 years. The pieces that are changing and that are really interesting are a lot of the newer advances around the edge, whether it's bringing in machine learning and AI types of techniques into simplifying the transformation of raw data into information products that can actually be applied, whether it's automating processes that used to be manual, whether it's scaling things up to move from lower resolution to higher resolution, time series. Those are the pieces where that's the pieces where the learning comes into play for folks that want to push the edges a little bit more, and basically just do a better job at whatever portion of the field they're driven by.
I think the way I stay up on GIS tech is by hiring folks fresh out of school. I mean, there's two different ways I think you can approach that question. So you were talking about like ArcMap versus ArcGIS Pro. You know, when we started making that change, it was the less experienced people on our crew with spatial data analytics who are like, but they know what the button is, right? Or the better pathway, the better way to go about it, because we're still trying to figure out how to do it the old way. And they're like, this is a better route. You could just do this instead, you know? But there are changes too about, you know, we used to have local relational databases and now everything's enterprise. We used to keep our data on hard drives and now it's all in the cloud. And I think that the one-stop GIS specialist that does everything for your organization is kind of a thing of the past these days. I think what you were saying earlier,
You can't do it all.
you need like the IT person and the person who understands the field and then the person who understands the geography, kind of working together. It's
If you don't have somebody administering an enterprise geodatabase
Who knows
that
what they're doing?
knows the underlying database system and how to have disaster recovery and performance tuning, if you don't have those skills, you will crumble under your own data weight.
Yes, yes, and we struggle with this as well with folks. I think it used to be easy to dabble in GIS. It's not as easy to dabble anymore. You used to be able to just have some shape files on your computer and your copy of
QGIS or Esri or whatever it is that you use, and it was functional. And it's a bigger world, and integrating into a larger enterprise system isn't for the faint of heart anymore, you know?
Yeah, it definitely is not. I mean,
Yeah.
I can be honest with this. Our department is struggling with making the move from being a little department that was mostly under the radar into one that has some, because we've done really well with some pieces of it and failed miserably on some others, that is in the public eye, is in the eye of the legislature, and needs to complete the growth process to mature as an enterprise, not just as a little 500 person department that was, people could happily just say, oh, look, they're playing with rocks.
I will say too, on the education side, it seems like over my career in education, there has been more of an embrace of non-Esri products, which I think is awesome. And so I don't want to sound like an Esri plant here, but I do think it's important to have to be the person who knows where the buttons are when you go into that entry level job, as much as we hate Esri, so it's on recording there. It's good. It's also good to know, because I think the reality is, especially at like the state agency level, you're going to probably be working with Esri products, and learning R and other workflow or Python to do analysis is amazing. But the analysis that's often the focus of a lot of class curriculum is kind of a privilege compared to, I think, often the day-to-day work is a lot more constructing, collecting data, database management, and probably that stuff going to be happening in the Esri suite. That's just my advice is be the person that knows where the buttons are, because often your managers won't know where those buttons are.
There's an advantage, like we sold our soul to ESRI long ago, we're very well entrenched, but you know, if you're in the private world and you're not in a public agency or an educational facility, the licensing for ESRI products is quite expensive.
They get you hooked.
Yeah.
They're a good dealer.
And so
Yeah.
if you don't have every license under the sun, which we don't, you know, if you don't have the highest level of access, you don't have the advanced license, there are things that you can't do in the ESRI suite where somebody else is going to turn around and say, yeah, QGIS is a tool for that, and it's free. So there are advantages to knowing both, you know, but I would say definitely if you're applying for jobs at an entry level position and you don't know the ESRI software, you're putting yourself at a major disadvantage.
Yeah, Department of Conservation, I think this is fairly typical of most of the other state agencies. We're 90 to 95% as we have a few folks who come from academic backgrounds that have the open source GIS skill set. But they're relatively rare, but they're also very highly valued for what they can bring to it. So the way I try, and it's increasingly difficult for me to keep my hands in on most of the GIS stuff, is setting myself individual projects and staying hands in on the troubleshooting, problem solving, conceptual phases of tool and application development in the department. I have to say that it's, for better, for worse, for me, it's gotten to the point where I have to make that a priority, and sometimes I have to take a little bit of heat from my director or others for not being more firmly in the policy and the guidance space and staying hands-on with it. It's hard.
I think that's the problem. As you move up in your career, you tend to move into management, right? And then if you move into management, you're a director, you're expected to be looking at strategy and policy and direction of the organization, and you're not expected to be doing GIS every day. And then that's the problem. You're just talking about, how do you stay current? And do you need to stay current with, like, what button do I push? Or do you need to stay current in where is this technology going? How does it work?
Yeah.
And for my own personal situation right now, I'm in international education. I'm not in natural resource management, which I was for 20 years, right? So I'm looking at, oh, there's all these software tools for international education management systems. And honestly, none of them really do what we want. So we're turning, you know, because I know something about GIS, we're kind of trying to build up with all the different little tool pieces that we have access to. In Esri products, I'm the Esri plant, by the way. Happy to be so.
Well, we were at the conference, so we're the Esri plants together.
Yes, there were the Esri plants together. So, yeah, so,
I don't think I can claim to not be an Esri, centric person at this point.
we drank the Kool-Aid, you know.
Well, and
They got us hooked on those free licenses.
Well, free, definitely not free anymore. Not, at least not in my world. I mean, I am proud that I did pretty much all of my graduate work using open source GIS. There are still some things that I was doing there with massively recursive sets of queries that I do not think that I could do within the Esri world right now. It was pretty much all run on PostGIS. That said, in the production world that I live in now, the enterprise requirements for stability, disaster recovery, 24-hour ability to call someone up and say, hey, it's busted, I need help now, pretty much demand Esri.
That was a long answer to, I think, a really short.
No, I think it was they were all great points to be made. You think there's any misconceptions with the spatial sciences field, and I guess,
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Oh, yes. First, that it's easy and that anybody can jump in and
How
do
did
it.
that, I'm just gonna jump in on this. I face this every day at Data Lab. For some reason, when you output a map, it suddenly became easy, and I don't know why. Because you have to do all that in 2 hours. What?
Just taking a map in 2 hours.
Right, of course. Yeah.
Well, and
So
I-
how does this happen? If you have insights, I would like to know. I'd be-
There is a huge difference between someone who can pop open a GIS of any stripe and look up a YouTube video and see how to add data in and how to make it look kind of pretty, and someone who can do something that is technically valid and not abusive of the data or the underlying theory. And that gap is a large one, and is not communicated well in the 15-minute YouTube video. The other thing is, and this is a battle that I wage constantly, is folks that want to do stuff that's inherently GIS, but not using GIS. And I've got a couple examples of those that I can throw around, but we've got a couple dashboards built in that are IT folks who are, I may be 95% Esri, they are 99.9% Microsoft. Irrespective of Esri's partnerships with Microsoft, and they're like, I want to use Power BI for this. And it's like, everything you're doing is already in GIS. Why are you translating it into something else and then struggling with doing a little dot on map thing for it within Power BI when we've got these other tools already licensed that are COTS? So customize it off the shelf stuff that will do what you want. Like, why are you fighting this battle when you don't need to? Another example is we've got a number of large database-based systems of records. We've got one that is a monstrosity. It needs to be, but it is a monstrosity called Wellstar for tracking the oil and gas drilling across the state of California and all the production that comes from it, all the permitting associated with it. That is a fairly classic relational database system on Microsoft SQL. With effectively no GIS built into it. It has latitude and longitude fields. That's its level of GIS. So we have to export everything out in order to display it or do any spatial analysis on it, which, as you might guess from oil and gas well locations, is a fairly common task. And that one's a real challenge. I'm not saying we could have changed course on that one easily, but we've got another one that we use for inventories of abandoned mines across the state of California. And there are somewhere in the range, and this is left over from our long history, And that one was built from the ground. Some wrinkles that it is. And don't underestimate their complexity, but also make sure that you're looking at all the tools, whether they're GIS or not, programming or not, open source or not, because the combinations of them, when done well, can be incredibly powerful.
I think one of the things we all have to learn is how to communicate GIS to those who don't understand it, which is kind of along what you're talking about. And it's particularly hard with the people that are up here, right? Although your boss should know a lot about GIS.
My boss did, my boss.
Dave
did.
Shabazian, yeah, he was in he worked for ICE for a long time, so, but, you know, I work for a geographer, right? And when I show her the system that I have put together as sort of a pilot, the first thing she looks at is a data point. This actually happened, and the first thing she says, well, that person's no longer with UC Davis, why is that data point here? And so I think that so what I'm getting at is, when you communicate GIS to somebody in a high position, and those are usually the decision makers, right? They're going to make the decision about what you do with GIS and where it goes. Make sure that what you show them is clean, and make sure that, you know, you have, that they understand what goes into it. And I think, and the best way to do that is to make them have to do GIS. And I can't do that with my boss, but, you know, I mean, I think anyone who is directing people who do GIS should have to try it. They should have to take a course in it, because they need to understand it's not just pressing a button.
And this challenge doesn't go away. I've got a demonstration this afternoon of essentially a rebuild of a program at a larger scale that my director implemented when he was working at the Sacramento Area Council of Governments on connecting rural agricultural with urban environments. I'm demoing his product back to him this afternoon. With a lot of enhancements and much more robust for where it needs to be. But one of those concerns is he knows enough to be dangerous. Actually, one of the ways I like to think about it is I always try to know enough to be dangerous, not just scary. and he's on the border of dangerous and scary, where he did it. He knows how to do it in a smaller context, knows better than I how to do it in that smaller context. But for lofting it out to a larger system that needs to be able to move further forward in a more robust way, that gap in knowledge is what makes it scary.
I think in terms of misconceptions, I deal too with that, you know, it's easy, or I get this a lot as a geography PhD student, like, geography, haven't we mapped everything? You know, and so we really live in this era where people take spatial data for granted, and there's not a lot of appreciation for the fact that those data points are inherently a digital model of the real world, and there's still a lot of frontline decision making about how do we capture this information, what data model do we use to represent it, what attributes do we use. And a lot of the work, I think, at the entry level is creating data as much as it is doing it now. And that's actually the second misconception I think a lot of people get, myself included, coming out of undergrad, having taken some GIS courses, and like, I know how to do a suitability analysis now, and I can do a spatial drawing. And those things are amazing, and often they do become part of your job. But we, even at the education level, I think we don't always appreciate data construction and maintenance as being such vital parts of the whole process. And a lot of the work is in that area, and it might not be always as fun or as glorious, but it's so vital to what the decision makers end up doing with that data, and knowing enough about how to just respect the nature of the phenomenon that you're modeling spatially can make the difference between a project making sense or something totally not making sense because you used points for something that you should have used polygons for, whatever, right? So yeah, how do I sum that up other than saying just the work that you do in the classroom might be very different than the work that you encounter at an agency, but hopefully the theories that you're learning in the classroom and thinking about how to represent spatial information is gonna allow you to really respect the nature of whatever agency you're working for, whatever group you're working for, respecting that information that you're making available for other people, because often that's the job.
I would say, as far as misconceptions go, the it's easy, anybody can do it kind of line comes up a lot. I often use the line with scientists that I work with where they say, well, I know how to use ArcGIS Pro, I can just do it myself. And I'm like, well, I know how to use a shovel. Do you want me to run your excavation? Like, your tomatoes, that's my skill level with the shovel, you know, this is a tool, and it's not, knowing where the buttons are is not knowing GIS, that's knowing how to use a tool. Then you go run, relational spatial statistics on a data set that you didn't bother to take out of WGS 84 now.
I have a perfect example. So I don't want to,
No, go for it.
and an expensive example.
That's kind.
One of, this was right after, around 2016, when I had just switched out of the UC and was spending time I did about 9 months with the California Geological Survey within the department. They do part of a geotech report for an area, particularly for a fault evaluation, making sure essentially that buildings aren't built on top of active faults where the foundation is going to get ripped apart when next time that fault decides to move. They dig large trenches across those faults. And for reasons that I don't want to get into, it's no longer the case. A lot of the California Geological Survey's data was in NAD 27. A company that was doing a fault evaluation study, wanting to build a very expensive high rise down in the LA area, took some of our data and converted it to KMLs and used that to decide where to dig their trench. And they missed the fault entirely with $150,000 trench.
Oh,
Because
data.
because of the data.
Nice to be with fellow
That's
nerds.
that's a good example when you're trying to teach somebody about
Yeah.
the importance of the datum, and they're like, yeah, whatever, it's a little bit off. You're like, no.
They missed the forget which fault name is, but I forget what the name, it was downtown Hollywood. So large, high value real estate, and they missed the trench, or they missed the fault entirely.
So sad.
And I'll just jump in, anyone who's been in the industry for more than like this much has a story like that they have personally. Like, I won't ask you guys to share your hurt, I know, I had not $150,000.
Yes,
You might have heard of the Million Acre Strategy, a collaboration between the U.S. Forest Service and the state to treat 1 million acres of forest for basically fuels management purposes. And one of the realities is that in judging, are we making that somewhat arbitrary target or not, you've got to add up all the work that all these different groups are doing. Many of these projects have multiple different sets of funders, but also a lot of them are doing things that are appropriate, but they're doing them to individual trees. So you've got points.
Cool.
And let's say Caltrans is removing hazard trees within roadways. How do you define what area of the effect of that 1 or 2 tree removal is, and how do you loft out the 20,000 they may do along a stretch of highway into something that's meaningful, because it is meaningful, but how do you turn that into something you can say, okay, that's X number of acres? Because these are really hard challenges, and they're ethical ones as well.
I think the ethics and looking at how that spatial information exists on a map is really important, instead of just scripting things through. We had an issue when I worked at the Public Utilities Commission where we went around to all the different cell companies and hardwired broadband internet providers. And every 6 months, they had to provide us shape files that showed their coverage area. And so most of the companies were fairly ethical. You know, the Verizon would give us, actually, they would just give us their tower locations, and we'd like project out a view shed to figure out where you can get mobile internet as you're driving around California. Most companies were fairly ethical, or they'd show us the blocks that you could get a hard broadband service to. And we had this one company, Digital Path, we'll make sure that's on the record. They were required to submit this data every 6 months, and this data went into actually ranking grant applications for like, can your rural community actually get this grant funding or not to better your internet? But they gave us this thing where somebody took a Sharpie, like Donald Trump style, and just went, oh, it's something like this, and gave us this big blob that looked like Gumby. And that was their service area, which clearly, you know, it was like a polygon with like 10 vertices on it that covered most of the state of California. And that when we processed that initially, that blocked out almost every California community for grant eligibility. And so just looking at that and realizing this person didn't take this seriously, they drew this thing with a Sharpie when they really should have thought, and being able to push back. And we eventually were able to reject their submission entirely, so that it didn't matter where they were providing service, they didn't even rank in the grant. So because somebody did this horrible data submission, they actually ended up with a lot of state subsidized competition in the communities they actually serve. So looking at stuff too, and not just scripting it through, is really important. That tree thing, yeah. How do you?
It's,
Acre?
yeah, I mean, they ended up, there ended up being a compromise that they were like, okay, we think that in most of these trees that they're dealing with, they're gonna have a canopy area of this, and they're likely being brushed back on average by 20 feet from around the location. So let's buffer by 20, merge, and then do some dissolving of the little spots in the middle of it to make it something that was tractable. But it's,
So I think that all comes down to how important back to
Yeah.
communication and back to understanding the science, the technology, and then being able to communicate it. And a lot of what we do as we're in GIS longer and longer is sort of at that policy level and talking to other people at a pretty high level, but understanding what's going on really with the data
yeah.
is so key of being able to do all of that.
I've got another fun example on it. It's another treatment related one. You may have heard that we as a state took a whole lot of heat for double counting forest treatments. And yes, we have some problems in our data that did result in legitimate double counting of it. But there are also pieces where there's a required educational component to the media, to the public, to leadership, that a forest treatment likely has multiple passes over the same area with different sets of activities going on. So for example, you will have an area, let's say you've got 100-acre treatment that you're going to do. You may go first through the entire area with a mechanical removal of excess biomass from it to get it down to a somewhat practical level. And then you may do a prescribed burn underneath it. So that same area has now been treated twice. Do you count that 100 acres or do you count that 200 acres? So we've got a number of ones where we're very explicitly having to educate people and present it both as what we're calling footprint acres, which would be the 100 acres piece, and activity acres, which would be the sum of all of the overlapping ones, so 200 in that case. And that's been a real struggle in most any dimension you can imagine for communicating that and doing it well.
Yeah, I feel like I get a lot of like, what do you do? Like, look at a map. It's nice to get the validation that I do hard things. Last question I have is, do you have any recommendations for people who are maybe an undergrad who are looking for internships or mentorships or like just networking opportunities in general?
Well, attending things like this is fantastic for a starter. But I would say, feel free to apply for everything. Apply for things that are a little above what you think your skill set is. That's okay. You know, I mean, the worst thing that happens is they don't call you, but they might, you know. So I would definitely say, you know, throw your resume out there. Don't be afraid of, oh, I don't have 3 years experience, well, you know.
I'd say, other than joining the band. But but that's a really good point, because use your network, even if your network isn't what you think it is. So,
Right.
yeah, it's all really, a lot of times it's about connections, you know, as much as sending in a resume is great, it's also. You know, find someone who is doing something that interests you and just ask if they can, you know, meet you for coffee, or if you can have a 15-minute Zoom call with them, or, you know, just become a person rather than, you know, a document. And then use those resources. I mean, just try, networking is so key to what you do.
Yeah, at least on the state side, there's a dichotomy there. I love knowing the people as the people, even like, it makes it. If I'm hiring somebody, I love knowing that that person is a rock climber or whatever. Though the structure that we're required to operate within in the state makes that knowledge really awkward for further on as part of the hiring process. I have yes, definitely apply to positions that are going to stretch you. We have had quite a few positions that have gone unfilled for an extended period of time, be for a lack of applicants. We just filled one to provide direct support to the 30 by 30 and biodiversity programs in the resources agency, where we interviewed 3 candidates. 2 of them were really technically skilled, but that's they came off as technically skilled. And the 3rd one that we hired was technical skills, maybe a little bit lower, but he was like, I'm leaving what I'm doing now because I want to do this specifically. And I know that, and he probably knew that he was a little bit under where we were shooting for, but that this is a calling kind of message being communicated. Like we hung up and some of my colleagues and I that were on was like, let's hire that guy. Because it was a person that came across, not just a list of skills being recited over a video call, as the case was in this case.
Yeah. I'd say too, think about broad applications. I like almost every position I've ever got was not necessarily because I was the GIS expert, it's because I could do this subject matter thing and I knew a little bit of GIS. And so knowing a little bit of GIS, I think, is valuable in a lot of different fields, even if the position itself isn't specifically a GIS position. Just even knowing how to interface with the GIS staff at an agency is already going to make you such a valuable employee as a urban planner, as a, you know, frontline person at an agency on the regulatory side. Being able to just, you know, that language. And so you can talk to the people that are like managing the data, that are providing maps. That already is putting you, I think, above other candidates in maybe non-GIS specific fields, but use that GIS all over the place.
Yeah. And if you're applying to the state, make sure you're filling out the application correctly and fully. Because those little things get you just knocked right off like, it doesn't even get onto the hiring person's desk if you miss a little checkbox. Most of the departments and all the job postings will have a contact name associated with the hiring that's in the HR department, and they can help make sure that you understand how the application process works in a way that even if it's clear that I'm the one doing the hiring, I'm probably going to direct you back to them, because if I say something wrong as part of that, I can contaminate the hiring. Whereas the HR folks have the ability to give you the right answers without possibly getting you opted out by me making a mistake.
In the private world too, you know, if there's an organization you want to work for, don't wait for them to post a job opening, just send your resume in. The place that I'm working now, I cold called the contact and network who was working there and just said, hey, you guys hiring? I'd really like to work for Far Western. And, you know, she said, well, send me your resume and I'll put it in front of the right person. And I had a job interview, I think maybe 2 months later, 15 years later, I'm a partner in the firm. People want to hire people who want to work there, you know, like we're looking for people who want to work for us, not people who just want like a stepping stone in another job to go into another place. So if you can demonstrate that, you know, look, you may not be hiring right now, but I just, you know, wanted to say I'd really love to work here and here's my resume, that'll stand out in somebody's mind. They might make an exception if you're just the right candidate. There's a fine line between, putting yourself out there and stalking the hiring manager, though. Stay on the right side of that line.
I know this is not, I'm just gonna jump in to Nate's point about the state hiring. I know this is not state hiring advice panel, but download those job descriptions with the name of the contact person, because once the job has filed closed, even if you haven't had your interview and you want to contact, it's gone. All that information's gone. So download the job description, download that hiring person, save it on your computer, and then, you know, then if you have questions for follow-up, you could, you know, still have your job description before your interview. 'Cause otherwise,
And if you're doing their online exams, which are basically very complex restatements of your resume and educational background, write it in Word, then copy and paste them over, because if that site, it's supposedly improved, but if it has an issue, it disappears in the ether and you're out a ridiculous amount of time.
Yep.
And one trick is if you see the positions that have a statement of qualification requirement, those tend to get vastly fewer applications to them because people don't want to put in the work, and that says something about whether you want to hire those people in it.
do a whole workshop on state hiring.
I was thinking that because both the state and federal have that exam requirement before you apply, and I think that trips a lot of people up, that they don't realize that they're not just submitting a resume and cover letter for state and federal, so.
Well, and if you want to make a field trip to Sacramento, the resources agency in one of those new associated buildings at its headquarters has a hiring center where they have set hours for coming in and sort of learning a little bit more about the application process, because filling positions has been a real challenge. And as far as they can within the rules that guide it, most departments really want to help people submit successful applications.
Yeah. I'll say this too, if there's people that are maybe juniors or you're not quite there, you know, you're not thinking about jobs right this second, but you're thinking about experience. There are a lot of faculty members that love to take on undergrad research assistants. You'd be surprised how much more you might know about GIS than your professor just by having taken 1 or 2 GIS classes, as we can attest very easily to. So getting some experience as a senior, I think, you know, can be really important. You might be super valuable on a research project that is inherently spatial, but there's nobody that's like a spatial science expert in that project. And just being able to get in there and say, like, I can visualize your data for you, and I can show you what this looks like on a map, can make a huge difference. So whatever field you're in at Davis, we're kind of geographers and GIS scientists are splintered across different programs. So you can be that person that says like, hey, I have a colleague that works in public health and he joined a team where nobody even thought about GIS. And now so much of what they're doing is mapping, and he's kind of gotten himself a full-time grad research assistantship just from this one thing of like, have you thought about putting this on a map? So think about those opportunities in the, you know, department silos that you might be in. You can be that spatial expert and bring a lot to a project.
Yeah, and there's a lot of growth right now in fields that you might not expect it. I mean, Michelle just recently had an amazing publication.
I'm working almost exclusively in medicine right now. I'm a biogeographer, but medicine needs people.
Yeah, and my ophthalmologist was really proud. He showed me a recent article where they did some very basic GIS, but they did do GIS on the juvenile glaucoma incidents. There's like, it's not the level that I think most of us would have done, but it looks valid and it's a foot in the door that starts to get it into it. And so there's lots of places that just need that little bit to kick them up over the threshold.
And I guess one thing, just as a kind of a looking at your career outward, those of you that are just sort of starting, don't pass up on the state or the university because you think, oh, I want to be in the private sector. I know the private sector has a lot of good things too, but I can tell you, as someone who is now retirement age, having a pension is a big thing. And also the fact that the state and the university have like Nate worked for University of California, and then he was able to move his pension to this, I think.
I actually didn't move it. But when I do retire, I get the some
She gets
service
both of them.
times between them.
So,
The
so.
UC retirement system is way more stable.
And it's not something I was thinking about when I was 25 or 30 even, but you know, then you suddenly wake up and you're 60 and you're like, oh, this is kind of a good deal. So it's a great place. Now, that again, the private sector can be, and nonprofit sectors can be great places to get started, or even to end up. You have pension plan, not pension plans, but you have retirement plans, 401ks. But again, think you might make less money working for the state than you do for the private. There can be advantages to that. So just
Well, and
think through that.
Public service loan forgiveness is a big one for nonprofit and state employment. So for those of you like me who self-finance their undergrads with a lot of loans that I still have in the background somewhere. That is honestly, I think what Karen's saying, that sometimes having something with stability and with those other perks is more important than having something with a higher sticker price salary,
Just, yeah.
including loan forgiveness.
Yes, I had, yeah.
Yeah, I just,
Yeah, sure. Why not?
yeah, I think I just want to add to her question, like, this is for like an early career, GIS professionals. So for people who just got out of undergrad or masters, and then they're not very familiar with like the GIS, like the industry, because they've been like a student most of their lives, and also, they're kind of helping certain professors doing some GIS work, but they haven't really had any industry experience. They didn't do like internship at a like a private company, stuff like that. So if they're in this kind of experience, then what kind of career suggestions would you give them? Like, for example, should they seek for an internship or just a full-time professional job, like an entry level? And also how to make them stand out among other like competitors who have like more experience or a higher educational level than they are, or how to like score, like how to kind of brand themselves in interview to kind of like suiting it to the GIS professionals needs. So this is for GIS jobs specifically, and also whether they should pursue a higher degree, like for example, a master's or PhD to kind of boost their chances of getting a job in the industry, or should they like just go straight for a internship and just boost their career experiences? Yeah.
For most general GIS work, okay, yeah, I know. Naomi's helping me keep track of my own time. A PhD is overkill. Master's degree, a lot of the times means something to the hiring. It's going to depend on where you're being hired.
That's gonna depend where you get your master's degree from.
Okay. One thing on the, it's only a very specific subset of positions within the state where the master's degree actually gets you any kind of pay raise or eligibility into things. It's really, there's a lot of stuff. It's bachelor's and then it's PhD. There's like not a lot in the middle. And we have a lot of master's folks within our GIS group, but we also have a lot, particularly within the leadership of it. But we have a lot of folks that have only a bachelor's, maybe not even a GIS specific bachelor's, just some subject matter one, and then something like a certificate from American River College.
Good.
As far as catching the eye, learn about the organization you're applying to. Tailor the resume that you're handing in to try to emphasize things that are noted within their mission statements or any strategic plans that you may be able to find. And read into it a little bit and say, and don't be too shy about making assumptions like, I believe that you need these types of skills, and I have these types of skills because of what I see within your website and within your other
types of things.
Yeah, I would strongly encourage you to not jump into a master's or a PhD until you have decided very clearly and for what purpose you are doing that. So it's not just something to do because, oh, I didn't get a job, so I think I'll get a master's degree.
Yeah.
I would say that I very carefully chose to get a PhD because I wanted to open up some doors, which for me was extremely valuable. I'm not working for the state. Meaning that I probably wouldn't have needed it had I wanted to go on and work and do state work. You have a PhD, and I don't know if that helps you or not, but I will say that for me, internationally, it has opened doors. I wouldn't have gotten a Fulbright in Bhutan had I not had a PhD. I would not, there's a lot of things I would not be able to do, and a PhD is respected very highly globally. So that's just my one bit about a PhD. And I think a master's or a PhD, again, you don't do it unless you really know what you want to do. You think about I mean, many of us in here you're getting a PhD. I don't know if you have you have a master's or bachelor's. And see, I mean, so it doesn't really,
Right.
it depends on what you want to do.
I would totally agree with Karen. I think, so I am somebody that was in that position and kind of did the bad thing, which is, I don't know what I want to do. Let me go get a master's in urban planning. And ended up discovering that the actual on the ground urban planning, it's so important, but it's so hard and it's not what I enjoy. I was happier doing.
You don't like being behind a permit desk?
And I did just enough public engagement to know that that's a skill set that's super important, but not what I want to do. So I think getting a master's or PhD can be really great if you want to increase your subject matter expertise. But I think in terms of GIS skills, really a bachelor's, I mean, and even having a bachelor's in geography, GIS, is already going to put you above in a lot of ways in terms of education, a lot of other candidates that might be going into those fields. And then I can't remember who said American River College.
Yeah.
Honestly, their program is really good for industry. And I would recommend, taking a community college course that is often they're taught by people that are in the field rather than taught by a professor who is working on research projects, but doesn't have to present things to clients, doesn't have, So I would recommend getting other experiences, even if it's not leading to a degree, just having taken those can be really valuable. Yeah, and think about it before going into it.
And there is a spatial minor at UC Davis that gives you that extra bit.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I have
Yeah.
for my undergraduate.
Yeah.
People who apply to my firm that have a certificate from ARC go to the top of my pile.
That's so cool. That's
It's
great.
and I think it's worth knowing that advanced degrees in GIS are kind of a new thing, right? Not advanced degrees in geography, but advanced degrees in GIS, because most of the people that you're going to be applying to, they're in management positions in firms or in agencies. There were master's degrees in GIS when we went to school. There was geography, and there was that one weird professor in the corner of the geography department that was really into computers, and that was about it, right? A lot of the community colleges that have really rocking certificate programs have been doing it for years and years and years and years. They have really good programs because they've been doing it for years and years and years and years.
And it's
But-
practitioners who often are full-time GIS with agencies and that they're
Right.
doing night classes, so
Right.
those can be really good.
And I think that, I think it's changing now, but I think that, like 5 or 10 years ago, pre-pandemic, a lot of the people who were applying that had master's degrees in GIS were getting an online master's from a nondescript university, and it was perhaps not as valuable as the community college certificate.
Interesting.
Now it's
And
changing.
a lot more expensive than the community
Right.
college certificate.
It's changing now, like there are good programs spinning up, and I think that we'll see a shift in the future where, you will be expected to have more advanced degrees for higher level positions in GIS, but I think right now, I think you can get by without it, and you should wait and know what you want to do before you do it, before you waste the money.
Yeah.
It's okay to add a little bit of context, like for my case at least, it's actually, I know exactly what I want to do.
I'm sorry, we need to wrap up the panel. Maybe we can take some extra questions.
I'm good for a few more minutes.
You're okay for a couple more?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, you have to leave it then, something, yeah.
I need to be basically back at the car by like 11:40.
We don't want to interrupt anyone's day, so if you feel the need to leave, please just.
I'm good for a little bit.
We're weird part.
Lot of fun, so.
Okay, I'll be brief. So, I actually am a hardcore geographer, as this gentleman stated himself. So I love geography, every aspect of it. And actually, when I consider like a master's degree in geography, I actually surprised that usually it is like dedicating to a certain degree, like certain field within geography. And then you have to pick like an advisor that is like studying geography in a very narrow sense. So I was actually kind of disappointed by that, but still, I think I'm a geographer by heart. So I would love to like actually pursue an academic career if possible, but I am pretty sure that I love geography and GIS is just like a tool, like also more page to get the geography out to make it industrially, useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Well, if that's your case, I mean, I think going to a master's degree, especially if you have an interest in a subject matter and you want to know more about that subject matter and then applying GIS to it is maybe a secondary interest, I think that can be a really good course. But feel free, we can talk to you after the panel about programs or what you're thinking about. And there are pros and cons to going right into a master's after undergrad too. Sometimes it's great to keep that momentum going. Sometimes your second year of your master's, you're just, why am I doing this?
I think it's better to get some experience in between. And when I went off and joined the Peace Corps in between, right? Well, actually, I worked for a year, but then I joined the Peace Corps and then I worked for a year after the Peace Corps and then I went to grad school. So I think, but then I knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I worked for Karen for 6 years before I started my master's.
I waited 25 years.
Never too late.
Thanks to all of your answers.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. This is great. I'm so happy to have heard from you and this is great for me. It's really for me. And I'm so glad that other people are doing it also.
Okay, yeah, thank you for having us.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Yeah, I'm gonna mess.
We shall organize this.